Battlefield 2042. The gameplay trailer has finally been released this past Sunday, and I absolutely loved it. This is exactly what I was hoping for this next game, and I cannot wait to hear more about it and get my hands on the beta when it releases. I've been a huge Battlefield fan ever since I was a teenager, and to celebrate the release of this new game, I wanted to share my experience with the franchise and why I think that, as long as DICE and EA handle this game properly, it could end up being one of the biggest Battlefield titles we've ever seen. So I'll start by talking about the first Battlefield game I've ever played, which was Battlefield 3. I bought that game about a year and a half after it came out, and it quickly became one of my favorite shooters of all time. At the time, the only shooters I was familiar with were the Call of Duty games, so being able to move from small arena style shooters to a more epic, large scale style shooter was absolutely incredible. The game was so expansive, it felt like the possibilities of what you could do in battle were limitless. I remember I used to keep a tally of how many helicopters I shot out of the air with tanks. I think my total tally was like 18 or something like that. I know that's probably nothing compared to other people, but hey, for a 13-year-old who was only allowed to play games on the weekends, I felt pretty good about that. I also became addicted to getting awesome knife takedowns. In fact, when I was looking at my old BF3 stats recently, the weapon I had the most kills with was the knife. So yeah, love me or hate me, that's the type of player I was. The game also had probably the most satisfying gunplay I had ever seen in any shooter. Every frag you got just gave you this sense of pride and you just felt like a total badass. This game really turned me on to shooters and it just holds a special place in my heart. I love Battlefield 3, despite how old it is, I can always go back and have a great time playing it. Unfortunately, my PC version of the game is bugged and it won't load up any servers when I try to, and that makes me very, very sad. Anyways, moving on from BF3, we have Battlefield 4. Now, my opinion of this game has shifted many times over the years. I got this game about a month after it was released, and at first thought I was very disappointed. I thought it was a huge step down from Battlefield 3. The game was a buggy mess when it came out, the gunplay wasn't nearly as satisfying as Battlefield 3's was, and the maps at launch were just awful. Some of the worst launch maps I've ever seen in any game, especially when you compare them to Battlefield 3's launch maps, which were probably some of the best multiplayer maps I'd ever played in any shooter before. Over time though, I've come to appreciate the game more and more, to the point where it is also one of my favorite shooters of all time. They polished the game up a few months after launch and get rid of a lot of the technical problems the game had. Even though the base maps were terrible, the DLC maps were excellent. The Naval Strike and Final Stand packs are some of my favorite DLCs in gaming history. And even though I still prefer Battlefield 3, I can acknowledge some of the things Battlefield 4 did better. For example, Battlefield 4 has much better vehicle gameplay. A lot of vehicles in BF3 were very slow, clunky, and just a pain in the ass to use. BF4 made the vehicle physics much more realistic and made the vehicles much easier to control. In Battlefield 3, the only vehicles I really liked using were tanks, but in Battlefield 4, I love pretty much every single vehicle they have in the game, except jets. I suck ass with jets, and I really never understood how to use them in either BF3 or BF4. I ended up buying Battlefield 4 3 times on 3 different platforms. I first had it on PS3 and would end up buying copies for both PS4 and PC. The PS4 and PC versions of the game obviously ran much smoother and contained all the features and scale of the full game, rather than the PS3 scaled back version of the game. This really helped me appreciate the game more, and I can now see that I was a little too hard on it when it first released. Now it's a shooter that I absolutely love and can always go back and have a great time playing it, despite how old it's getting. Now, moving on from Battlefield 4, we got Battlefield 1, and this is where the franchise kinda starts to fall off for me. Now, when this game was first announced, I was super excited. I thought the game looked incredible from a graphics and gameplay perspective. I loved the theme and animation style they went for, and despite the historical inaccuracy of the game's depiction of World War I was really excited to get back into a historical shooter, so to speak. My brother and I pre-ordered the game after we played the beta, and when it came out at the end of October 2016, I played the absolute shit out of it. I was in high school at the time, and every day after school I would run downstairs, play BF1 for at least a couple hours before forcing myself to get off and start my homework. That lasted for about a month. After that, I just suddenly lost interest in the game and never picked it up again. I had a lot of fun playing the game in that time span, but for whatever reason, the game just lost its appeal to me after that first month. I think the reason behind this was because I was more excited for the overall setting and theme of the game, but once that novelty wore off, it kinda wore off my interest as well. When you look at BF1 with a blind eye, the gameplay can be quite dull at times. This is mostly caused by the extreme lack of gun variety in the game. Now, this is obviously because of the time frame that the game is in, and I completely understand that. But it doesn't change the fact that these reasons combined left us with gunplay that just wasn't as fulfilling as other Battlefield games. I still consider Battlefield 1 to be a good game, and I definitely got my money's worth out of the game. I just lost interest in the game very quickly, and I never really found any energy to try and get back into the game after that initial loss of interest. So that's my experience with Battlefield 1. Now let's talk about Battlefield 5. When I first heard that they were going to go back to World War II for their next title, I was pretty excited to see what they cooked up. After all, I hadn't been into a World War II game since COD World at War, and I was down to try to get into a new one. But man, after that trailer dropped, I was completely disappointed. This is not at all what I wanted for a World War II game. I was okay for the cartoony and alternate universe style of Battlefield 1, but for Battlefield 5, it just really got under my skin for some reason. Probably because I have a predetermined idea of what World War II looks like in my head due to all the movies and other types of media that have come out surrounding it over the years. But regardless of why I loved the setting and vibe of Battlefield 1 and why I hated it for Battlefield 5, I still hated it nonetheless. The gameplay didn't look too appealing either. At first glance, it just looked like copy-pasted gameplay from Battlefield 1. I even heard that they took a lot of assets from Battlefield 1 into this new game. And again, the gameplay for Battlefield 1 just didn't do it for me for the long term. I got the beta, played like 20 minutes of it, and that was enough information for me to decide that I didn't want the game. I'm not saying Battlefield 5 is a bad game. I know there are a lot of people out there who really like it. It just wasn't the Battlefield that I wanted to play. And that brings us to today. Because of disliking Battlefield 5 and not playing that much of Battlefield 1 in the long term, I've had a pretty dry spell with Battlefields. Like, it's been almost 5 years since I've played a Battlefield game regularly. And I think that's the case for a lot of people because the hype for Battlefield 2042 is real. The teaser broke all of DICE's records for likes, shares, and other types of media attention. And when the trailer first released, it got over 10 million views within like 3 days or something, with more likes than Battlefield 5's had in an hour. People are pumped for this game, myself included. I would definitely say that modern to near future shooters are my favorite era of shooters to get into. I absolutely loved Modern Warfare 2019. When I got that game, it really felt good to sink my teeth back into a good modern shooter again. But that being said, I've always preferred Battlefield to Call of Duty, and we haven't seen a modern Battlefield game since Battlefield 4, which came out in 2013. I also love the fact that it's in the near future rather than right in the present. I love the Final Stand DLC in Battlefield 4 where they played with some semi-futuristic ideas like that flying gunner robot or the railgun, and this new game looks like a full game of that Final Stand DLC. The game's making some interesting changes. For example, classes are mainly tied with the specialists within them. Weapons and gadgets are not class-specific anymore. Not too sure how the balancing will work for that, but we'll see. They're changing the melee animations from first person to third person. I'd rather they have kept it first person, but honestly, as long as they look really cool, it doesn't really matter to me all that much. They're allowing you to change attachments on the fly in game, which I absolutely love. And finally, the overall scope of the game is just going to be massive. Warzone-sized maps with 128 players sounds awesome. Hopefully the maps are well balanced to prevent some areas becoming absolute clusterfucks, but we'll have to wait to see when the game launches. Regardless of the changes they're making to the franchise this year, I'm very optimistic, and I think that as long as the developers have their heart in it, and the fans are on board, which they seem to be so far, I think that this is going to be a great year for Battlefield. Let me know if you guys are excited for Battlefield 2042, and have yourselves a wonderful day.
Darn it. Ooh, pancake!